Hello, and welcome back. We're going to pick up the story that we left off last night, and it was a story about how a man named Zachariah got his voice back when his son, whose name was John, was born. And speaking and talking and getting a message to people was an important part of what John's life was about. The Bible says, John grew up, and he loved God very much. He spent all of his days serving God, and he lived out in the desert. And for clothes, he wore camel's hair, and he also wore a leather belt. Most of the time, he ate locusts and wild honey for food. He lived off the land a little bit, and usually when they draw him, they make him look like this, a little bit. See, there he is, and he's wearing a coat made out of camel's hair. Maybe not a coat, just kind of like a robe kind of stuff. And he's got his leather belt holding it in place, and he's eating wild honey. He must have had a pretty thick skin, because if you're going to be eating honey like that, straight out of the wilds, you're going to have a few run-in with bees. And so maybe he got stung once or twice. But, we think of him as this gruff, you know what I mean? Gruff, yeah, grouchy kind of guy. But he must have had a sweet tooth. I bet he liked his sweets. He liked his honey. Well, when he was out there in the middle of the desert, God was with John. John spent his days telling others that God was about to send someone special to them. So he was bouncing back and forth between being in the desert and being with people and being in the desert. And when he did go out to the desert, he spent time to pray. He was alone with God. And that can be a good thing. Not everybody is a person that likes big crowds. Not everybody is the sort of person who always has to be with somebody. Some people are more okay on their own. But then he still needed other people. And some people love big crowds, and some people love to be around other folks. He kind of bounced back and forth between being one way and the other way. And at one point, God was speaking to him, and another time, he was speaking to these other people for God and telling them the things that God had told him. And that was that God was sending his son Jesus. And John was only about 3 months older than him. They were cousins. They would have known each other. A lot of people listened to John, and a lot of people tried to obey God's rules. And John took these people to the Jordan River and baptized them. They dipped down into the water, and it was his way. The Jordan River was where the people had crossed into Israel when they were coming out of the desert where Moses had led them. Remember that story? And they had entered the promised land. And John was probably trying to symbolize for them at that point, hey, listen, you've been living in this kind of way, and you're going to live in a new kind of way now. It's a little different from what we think of as baptism when there's a baby involved. He was trying to get a point across. And so they would go into the Jordan, and they would dive under the water with him, and then this showed their family and their friends and their neighbors that they loved God, and that they were going to be living in new ways and stop doing bad things that they were doing and start doing good ones. But John knew that there was going to be a lot more to it, and that it was important to be good, but there was a lot more than just being good, that God loved everybody, and not just because of what we do, but he loves us even when we do wrong things. And so he kept telling them that as wonderful as what it was that they were doing, even better things were ahead for them. He said to them this. He said, I baptize you with water, and someone else is coming who will baptize you with God's Spirit. And everybody began to get excited about that. We're going to hear more about that tomorrow night, okay? And it's worth getting excited about. Anytime we know that God is right with us is a good time. And now he's with you, and now he's with me. And so that makes it good. So have a good rest of the evening. Have a good day tomorrow. And remember that God's with us all the time. See you then.